So I think we're recording now, and let's share the screen. So we'll get right down to the task at hand. Okay, so this is our seventh shiur, not counting the introduction, and it's the second half of Siman Sadik Aleph, which Mitzvah Hashem we're going to finish today. Sorry about the unexpected delay last week. Hopefully give everybody time for Chazara, and once again to stress the idea of Chazara. I'll mention a little bit more about it at the end of the shiur. You see over here, it says Siman Sadik Aleph Sif Hey through Zayin. You'll see in the Chaveres, it's printed in the Chaveres, printed Shulchan Aruch. There's also a Sif Ches. So we'll just mention it, but we really already learned that back at the beginning of Siman Pei Zayin. But we'll put it in context over here. But the main discussion is these sifim, and let's first get a little bit of an overview of the siman, so we have a perspective. So basically, we're speaking about Siman Sadik Aleph is when there's physical contact between Bosor and Cholov. Basically, it's always speaking about Kivina, and unless you're speaking about a Dover Solo, which we'll also touch on today. So we had in Pei Zayin the general definition of Bosor and Cholov and Bishul, and then we had the distance that needs to be maintained in order to eating at the same table, and also when one person is eating, the waiting period. Now we skipped Siman Sadik about Chal, which is also a contact between Bosor and Cholov within the animal, because in the udder of the animal you have the udder itself, which is Bosor, and the Cholov is coming from within it. So how do you separate them so one could eat the udder? I mean, today we don't eat, in general, Chal. It's not normally sold. In the United States and Canada, I believe it's illegal to sell Chal used for dog food. In any case, that was Siman Sadik, and then Siman Sadik Aleph are speaking about actual physical contact in ways other than cooking. And then Sadik Base, we'll start talking about the actual contact itself within a pot. But here is talking about when there's no pot and there's contact between them. So we had in Sif Aleph, Base, and Gimel, what happens? Maga Kar, see on the right over here, when they're both cold, different details regarding that. And then we had in Sif Dalet the whole inyan of Maga Cham, when one of them or both of them is hot. They're not in a pot, but they're nevertheless hot. And Bosor Eichol of Reischim, one of the two is hot. So we have a hot piece of meat touching a hot piece of pizza on a table. And then we learned all about Tata Gavar, about what happens when the bottom is hot and the top is cold, and vice versa, when the top is hot and the bottom is cold. Then we aser in general Kadei Klifa, which was going to be also a big issue in today's shiur. So we say that when the hot one is on the bottom, Tata Gavar, we asking that the whole thing as if it was cooked together, and aser is completely the upper one, which is not the case when the bottom one is cold. Then a Tata Gavar Mitzvah cold, but nevertheless, although it overpowers and it doesn't enable the hot piece on top, let's say a hot pizza fell on top of a cold piece of meat, so before it cooled off, it nevertheless was Beleya Kadei Klifa, as we learned over there in Sifdal. Today's shiur is basically about the inyan of Malicham. So that's Maga Maluach, that either the meat was salted or the cheese was salted. And Agav, that's something which is actually very common The salting of cheese, cheddar cheese, is salted within the process, and it's very relevant inyan when it comes to speaking about the kalim. Perhaps we'll mention it if it comes up, if we have enough time to go into that. That's Be'er Sif Hey and Vav, but the truth is you have also in Sif Zayin, but Sif Zayin also mentions about Magakar, so that's going to be today's Shiur, Hey Vav and Zayin. It's not exclusively Magakar, we have salting also as all part of it. And this is all of this is really centered around one piece of Gemara, which we will have to analyze and go over in order to understand properly, and that's the general picture of today's Shiur. But before going into that, I'd just like to go over a bit, since we're going to be speaking about Malicha, some of the basics of Malicha. I'm sure many of you have learned Malicha, even those of you that didn't learn Malicha. If you ever read the back of the box, you have the kosher zaltz, everybody buys for Pesach, and then you can take Hilchos Malicha from the back of the box and figure where it is in Siman Samach Tes in Shulchan Aruch, and get all the Maram Makemis. But in any case, we did mention this before in the past about the interrelationship between different parts of Shulchan Aruch, but over here you see very, very clearly, here you're talking about a whole section on Malicha, and meanwhile you have Hilchos Malicha earlier in Shulchan Aruch, and then you have in Siman Kuf Hey, which we've been constantly referring to back and forth, especially in this Siman, but other Simanim as well, which speaks about different sorts of contact when it comes to the Isurim. Siman Kuf Hey, you're talking about Kavush, and Malicha, and all different permutations and different ways that Isser and the Heter could come in contact with each other. And in fact, some of what we're going to be learning today, based on the Gemara speaks, you have kosher fish with a treifa fish, or kosher meat with treifa meat, and one of them is salted, and the kosher was salted, or the Talmudic one was salted. And the interrelationship between the two is the basis of some of the dinim here. So really, you can't get a complete picture without learning different topics in Hilchos Malicha, especially some Samach Tes and Samayin. We have some other places also. Then you have in Taruvas Siman Kuf Hey, and then we have over here in Tzadik Aleph. So to get to, and then they need some other things in Hilchos Pesach too. So it's Kol HaTorah Kula is B'chal interconnected one thing with another, but we see it specifically over here. So although I'm sure the basics of Malicha everybody knows, but just to go through just the basic, some of the basic ideas. So we're all speaking the same language, and some of the topics are going to be mentioned over here, like Derech Hagav, assuming everybody's familiar with this. So let's just go straight to the point. So we know that meat, whether it's chicken or flesh from a behema, has the Isser Dam, which is nivla in the meat, and you have to take it out. And two ways of getting it out, either through Malicha, salting it, or through tzli, broiling it. There are two effective ways of getting out the blood. If it's liver, salt is not effective, and you have to have only tzli. That's the only way to get the blood out. What does the procedure consist of? So it consists of hadacha rishena, and then malicha. So you will just, not going to the details, you rinse it, and then you put take it out of the water, let the excess water run off, and then you salt it. And then after it sits in the salt for a certain period of time, then you do a hadacha achrena, and you rinse it at the end as well. Now the phrase hadacha is going to be relevant to us over here, and it's used in a very, very broad sense, because you have hadacha, which could just be spritzing it with water, is hadacha, and then you have shriya, which is submerging the meat in water, which is technically the way it's going to be used in today's siman, is shriya, soaking it rather than just rinsing it, which could be done not in a vessel full of water. So the first hadacha rishena gets rid of the blood from the surface and softens up the meat. Then when you do malicha, there's all discussion, does it have to be on both sides of the meat, or is it enough on one side of the meat? And we say lechatchila that it has to be on both sides of the meat, but b'diavad it's good if it's on one side of the meat. So if you have a chicken, for example, so you clean out the inside of the chicken, so how are you going to do it on both sides? You have to salt inside too, and that's why many mahadir to have the chicken split in order to have the malicha clearly on both sides to make sure that it reaches. all of the inside, because otherwise it's going to be malicha mitzad echad, which is b'diavad also good. But lechatchila, you're supposed to have it on both sides. You have it on the outside of the chicken, then you have it on the inside of the chicken. It's from both sides, even if they don't do splits. So there are the systems which are put in place to salt it on the inside, because lechatchila you have to salt on both sides. But the ikar adin, it's sufficient if you will do it on one side. And the reason I'm mentioning it over here, it's going to be relevant to halachas we're learning over here in Tzaddik Aleph, what's lechatchila, what's b'diavad, what's the minimum, and what's the way we do things lechatchila. It doesn't mean that it's not considered to be malicha if you do even less than that. So too, when it comes to shiur malicha, so the minig is that we leave the salt sitting on the meat for an hour before we do the rinsing afterwards. But mikra adin also, it's less than that. Kadehi l'chmil. How long is kadehi l'chmil? So that's a machlekes, whether it's 18 minutes or 24 minutes. Whole story there, Rabbi Shulchan Aruch and the Siddur, different days. But if you are worried that as a result of malicha, we say malich kereseach, that's the issue that we're facing over here, that since, if you remember at the beginning of Pei Zayin, so we discussed that when there was something was, when tam was conveyed without bishul mamish, so we'd say it's not derech bishul. And when is it also ba'ano, only derech, when it was derech bishul? And if we mention over there if it was kavish or maluach, even though we say kavish kemavushul and malich kareseach, that something is, we're not talking about salting, that something was salted as if it was boiling. It's as if it was boiling. Okay, so therefore the tam is going to be conveyed from one to another, and therefore you're not going to be able to eat it. But it still is not going to be prohibited b'hana, because derech bishul also teira, and malich is kereseach avadimyan. So it's not mamish derech bishul, and therefore it's going to be mutter b'hana, but nevertheless the taste is going to be conveyed. So although we're not going to kasher meat today by just leaving it in the salt for 18 minutes or 24 minutes, we can do it for an hour. But nevertheless, make it adin, since that's sufficient to be malicha. So the shiur malicha to answer something, we're going to say it's going to be 18 minutes. But it's important to know what's beker adin and what's a hiddur, what's going beyond that. So we have basic dinim about the hadacha before and then afterwards. Also, what's coming out of the meat is dam. Sometimes you'll call it tzir, depending on the situation. It's going to have also some different dinim about what's the status of what's coming out. Basically, it's treif, and it's also considered, although it's going to be cold to the touch, but since there is malich kereseach, it has the din of something hot, and it's going to prohibit whatever it falls on top of, whether it's a keli or whether it's another piece of food. In general, malicha prohibits something kadei klifa. And if you remember, we learned before different ways of how deeply it could prohibit. So kadei klifa is one thin layer. Kadei natila is more than that. It's the thickness of a finger, 2 centimeters. But in general, when we're talking about malicha, we're talking about answering things kadei klifa. But there are exceptions to the rule. And halacha lemaisa ends up that virtually everything is included in the exception to the rule. So it's not going to be kadei klifa. In many, many cases, certainly it's going to end up answering everything. We'll soon see in the Ramah when we get to the learning it inside. So this is just a very, very basic overview of some basic concepts in malicha that we're going to deal with. Any questions before we go further? I'm not doing Hilchos Malicha, you have to learn. Hashem will be learning it. First is Bas B'chalav and Tarubas and Malicha. But we need these concepts in order to go further. Any questions on what I said so far? Okay, so let's jump into the Chamer. Okay, so we have the salting part of it, and then we have what it is that we're salting. I mentioned once by one of the previous shiurim that's very helpful. At least I find it helpful to organize things on the inyan of Elam Shana Nefesh. Rabbi frequently mentioned by Fabreinians. The inyan of, say, for Yitzhak is built around the idea that you have Elam Shana Nefesh. Elam is space, and Shana is time, and Nefesh is Nefesh. So when you have Malicha, you have how much salt is being used. It's similar to the idea of Elam. and then you have how long the malicha taking place within you from shana, and then you have the nefesh. What is it that you're salting? In particular, what we're going to be interested in is there fat, is there shuman, is it davar shamein, is it something which is lean or something which is dry or something which has fat? And both meat obviously could have be a davar shamein. You can have a lean piece of meat, and then you can have a fatty piece of meat. And so too, you have in cheese, you have milk fat in the cheese. The cheese could also be a davar shamein. It's going to affect the halacha. So we have in malicha, we have over here, first of all, in order to say maliach karaseach, here we're going through it, see over here, hagdoras, davar maluach. We're going to the general definition. That's going to be the first part of today's shiur, in order to be able to understand all of these sifim, how much melech is needed until it becomes maliach karaseach. So how much salt do you have to have? And we're going to see that it's a big machlekes rishonim. Big machlekes rishonim, and when it comes to acharenim, how much salt is going to be in order to be considered maliach karaseach. And then we have how much time is there. And then within the time, we have two separate questions, because we have the shir malicha, which is going to be, let's say, 18 minutes. We'll use that as a shir for malicha. So what's pshat? What's happening within the middle? Is it pshat that nothing happens until the 18 minutes is finished? What's the status of something that happens within that 18 minutes? That's one question. And the other question is, what happens after the 18 minutes? And these are two very important shaylas. So be'ezer shlav maschum maliach karaseach. At what stage of this process do we say maliach karaseach? Maliach karaseach starts at the beginning at 18 minutes, in the middle 18 minutes? Is it only after the 18 minutes? And then the shayla is mosam b'stayim maliach karaseach. Does this stay on forever? Does it continue to go? And I also just should point out, I should have maybe pointed out at first, that in general, when we salt meat with a considerable amount of salt, we're doing it in order to get the blood out. But the idea of maliach karaseach could apply even if it's already been kashered. You're talking about meat which was already kashered, they would salt it as well. People would salt it as a means of preserving it and for keeping it for long periods of time, as we will soon see. So all of these two things, which are three, the amount and the time period, and within time period, those two time periods are going to need a definition. And we're going to be seeing that from the Rishonim, from Shulchan Aruch and the Psak Din. And then when it comes to food itself, we want to know, is it a davar kachush or shamein? Is it something which is lean, which doesn't have fat, or is it a davar shamein? And the general principle is that if it's a davar kachush, so then it's a regular status, and you can say that it's kedei klifa. It's only going to prohibit a thin layer. But if it's davar shamein fafei bekule, and you can answer the whole thing. Then another issue which is going to be mentioned in the Ramah is it a davar nasal, or is it a meitzik? Is it a solid piece like you have in the pictures over here? But then when we're talking about dairy, we're talking about milk too. So what happens if it's a liquid? And then as we'll see in Shulchan Aruch, what happens when they're both salted? But let's say one is salted, echa maluach vecha tafel. Tafel in this case means not salted. So what happens when one of them is salted and one of them is not? Okay, so those are the general issues that are going to be clarified over here in the Shulchan Aruch and Sifhei and Sifvav. But first we have to learn a shtickle Gemara. So this you have also in your Chiveres over there. It's on page 57 or Chiveres. This is Chulin Daf Kuf Yud Beis Amud Aleph, and it is Talmudic story time. What happened? Hu bar gozla. A bar gozla is a bird, evidently a small bird. That was a bird. The nafel lakaded the kimcha. It fell into a keli of kimcha. What's kimcha? So we know we have kutach habavli. Kimcha is kutach. You know, from Milchas Pesach, from Mishnayos. Kutach habavli was a milchik dip. People used to dip. So well, the reason it's an Ilchos Pesach is because one of the ingredients is pieces of bread that are left there to ferment, but it certainly is milchik, and it's cold. And this bird, not a whole bird, the meat of the bird, fell into a kadet de kimcha. Now, was it a hot bird or was it a cold bird? The Gemara doesn't say. But we'll get to that soon. It appears from the Gemara we're talking about a cold bird. In any case, the shaila is, once it fell in, do we need to do anything to it? Is hadacha sufficient, or do you need to do more than that? So normally, if you had a cold piece of meat which fell into milk, what would be the din? No, Rabbi say. We had that at the beginning of the simon. What's the din? You have a cold piece of meat fell into the milk. What's the din?
The milk was cold or hot?
No, any volunteers? Wait a
If
second.
it's cold, you have
Maybe
to
I
keep
don't have
toilet.
my speaker on. My speaker was off. No, I hope everybody heard me. Yeah. No, what's
If it
the
was
din?
cold, you have to do klifa. If it was hot, it's straight. If the milk was cold.
Let's say it was just milk. Let's leave out the rest of the recipe of this kutach habab. You have let's put it the other way. You have a raw piece of meat and a drop of milk falls on it. What do you have to do? Cold milk. What do you do? You do adacha. You do adacha. You're gonna have to do some shifshuf, something like that. But there was no blia. Nothing was absorbed. So if everything's cold and you can clean it, so then you do adacha. Finished. The problem over here is that kutach habavli has salt in it. It's salted. It's like a dip. It's sharp, and the salt was one of the ingredients in this kimcha. So the problem is, excuse me, that we know we have a klal that Shmuel said Malich Reseich, and we pass him like Shmuel. So the shaila is, what are you going to do with this bar gozla? It's a little bird. You're going to have to take off kadei klifa, to take off a layer of the meat because it fell into a salty solution, a salty milchik solution. You have to take kadei klifa. There could be nothing left of it. So what are you going to do? So this was the story. So we have over here a dilemma. So bar gozla, the nafal lakada the kimcha. So it fell into the kutach habavli. And what happened? Shari Rav Chinana Bred Rabbi mi Pashrunya. Call him Rav Chinana for short. He was the son of Rabbi from Pashrunya. That's what he was. And he allowed it. What do you mean he allowed it? He allowed them to just do adacha. He allowed them to just rinse it off and not take a diklit. Okay, what was his justification? So Amar Rava, said, Man chakim lemishra ki ay gavna. Who could be so wise? Man chakim. Lemishra is lashon shari, to allow something like this. If not him, he was such a chacham that he found a heter for this meat over here. How was he matter? Kasavar, because he held ki Amar Shmuel Maliach Harihu Kareseach, that when Shmuel paskin that Maliach Kareseach, which would make you think that you're gonna have to take a clip, says no, that depends how much salt is there. Hani Mili, when did he say you have to take kadei klifa? Because Maliach Kareseach hechad the ein nechol machmas malchi. When there was so much salt that it's ein nechol, it can't be eaten as is, machmas malchim, because there's so much salt. In other words, there was a large amount of salt. It wasn't just a little bit of salt. But this kutach habavli that it fell into, this has a smaller amount of salt, has less salt in it, and it's capable of being eaten. It's not so much, it's not so salty that you can't eat it as is. So therefore, so he said that you don't have to take the klipa, that it's good enough hadacha, like it fell into something that didn't have salt at all. Because if it has only a small amount of salt, it's as if it has no salt at all. And therefore, it's a regular case of hadacha. I'm a leich keresech. That's talking about ein nechol machmas malchi. Okay, there's another, the rest of these, the next few lines of Gemara, the next three, the last three lines over here are going to be Sef Zayin. So we're going to learn that for Sef Zayin, but let me leave it out for now. It's just going to mix this up because it's, we're going to get ahead of the game. And that has its own, it's another subject, and it's extension of this din. But the first thing is we're dealing now, basically this Gemara defines for us how much salt do you need for Maliach Kereseach. So that's the Reb Chinan Paskin, that it has to be Eina Nechel Machmas Malchi. Clear? That's the din we're interested in. When Shmuel said, it's only when it has a lot of salt, so much salt that you can't eat it the way it is. Good? Okay, so that's the klal over here. So since Maliach Kereseach, the taste can go from one food to another, but that's dafke if it's salted in such a way that it's too much salt for a person to normally eat it in such a fashion. Okay, the question is, how much is that? Like I mentioned before, that this is a machlekes rishenim, how much that is. And we have 4 days over here. Okay, so it's a halachic statement. And as the way it works, in Teresh Bachal, and you'll see many illustrations and kashas, we have a clear din. So the din is very, very clear on paper that if it's that it's going to answer whatever it comes in contact with. And if it's necham machmas malchay, then it's not going to answer it, and it's going to be good enough to rinse it. It's good enough hadach. But we're going to go by each individual. Somebody says it's got too much salt. Somebody says it doesn't have too much salt. What's the definition? The halachic definition over here. So you have all Tosfos over there that goes through a number of opinions on this. You have Rashi and Tosfos, and let's just make the summary of the din over here. So it's easy to remember. You got this these bars over here is like, you can look at it as being more salt. So the top opinion has the most salt, and anything below it is called Eina Nechel Machmas Malchi. So in other words, okay, let's just go through the opinions. This is that Rabbi Yankiv Yisrael, who was one of the Baal Tosfos, is quoted by Tosfos. It says, Nemlach l'shimur oruch. So we know we have today something like beef jerky, for example. You have various proteins in the days of before refrigeration. So it was very difficult. Everybody, pardon me. And days before refrigeration, how did you hold on to meat, fish, things like this? How did you make it last? So you salted it. If you ever saw salted fish, they have over here in Montreal. So you have many of the Oriental. You have these ethnic stores, and it looks like shaggy pieces of plywood that are sitting in a box or a barrel, and it's salted codfish, and it'll stay virtually forever. And it's hard, like you can use it as a cricket paddle, whatever they play over here. And it's hard, and you have to soak it in water, and in order to soften it and to get the salt out, because it's totally inedible. It has so much salt. The salt takes out the moisture and has the effect of preserving it for a long period of time. So if you want to preserve for a long period of time, you need a lot of salt, and you have to leave it in the salt for a long period of time. So that is the first opinion that we have over here, that's called Eina Nechel Machmas Malcha. You put in so much salt, so then that's what it means, Maliach Kereseach. Anything less than that, it's good enough hadacha. So that it ends up that it's a very, very big shiur for how much it's going to be Maliach Kereseach, but it ends up being more mekel, because anything less than that is already Nechel Machmas Malcha. We don't pass on like this day. Okay, then there's a second day. The Rashi is similar. You don't have to keep it for such a long period of time, but at least for a trip, that's the last shimur l'derech, that you're going on a trip. Okay, we don't pass like this either. Then you have the Rabbeinu Tam. Many other Rishonim hold nimlach kachshara lebish, that how much salt you put on when you normally want to cook meat. In other words, you want to salt it, the malicha we're talking about before, to take out the blood. So I'm just going to stop the, just want to explain this for a second, because it's going to be very important to understand the Ramah. Maybe a show of hands first. Who salted meat here before by yourself? Anybody ever salt meat here? Raise your hand if you salted meat. Did malicha. Remember, one year, the Rebbe said it was like around this time of the year, and the Rebbe said every Jewish, okay, so we have one Baal Malicha. We have a Baal Malacha, Baal Malicha, okay, we have a few. Good. The Rebbe said that all the Jewish women and girls have to know how to do Malicha, you have to know how to salt meat. And it was a pella by everybody. It was already in the days. And it used to be, I remember when I first came to Montreal, the butcher shops used to say, if you want your meat salted, ask for it. Because people would say, hid there to the woman in the house, you want to make sure that the malicha was done properly. This butchery is salting meat for everybody. She's not thinking about my family. I want to salt properly for my family. Rabbi Handel used to kasher all his own chickens. He used to do it by himself, make sure it's done properly, so on and so forth. Okay, so that's malicha l'kedera. When you're salting in order to take out the blood, so you have to cover the whole surface. Doesn't mean you cover it like it's a snowstorm. You cover that there has to be a light covering. We'll come back to more of a definition of that in a second, because it'll be very important for the halacha. And it's you say it in other areas of halacha too. I think it's important to get straight. Then you have another level, which is going to be the fourth day, is called malicha l'tzli. Malicha l'tzli, when you broil meat to take out the blood. So technically speaking, there's no need for malicha. It's the fire that's drawing out the blood. You don't need any salt. Nevertheless, the minig is you put very less salt than you would do malicha l'kedera. And it's sort of like to get the blood flowing, l'chatchila, so you put a very, very light salting over there, and that's called malicha l'tzli, which is even less than malicha l'kedera. So the problem is that's all on paper, but in real life, how do you define malicha l'tzli and malicha l'kedera? So I'll tell you two short instances what happened, which will illustrate this. So so I learned this from Rav Handel Rashal. So once had to go to another factory in the States. I was a whole we get to Malicha, we'll bring it up. It was a gazeta from the government, certain things they wanted to change in the system of kashering the chickens. So we figured out how we're gonna be able to put up with bring a case to the government. So first, let's see what the United States does. They have the same problem. So we went to visit. It was Falls Chickens then. It was in South Fallsburg. It hasn't been around for quite a number of years. So went down over there to check out to see how they dealt with this particular issue. Was the temperature of the water they were using. In any case, we went down over there. So the Rav Machshir was there, and they're salting the chickens. It was a high volume plant. And so Handel asked the Rav Machshir, why in the world are you putting so much salt? So the Rav Machshir said, Hashem Kitev, I finally have a Rav that knows how to kasher. He says, because everybody comes, they come to visit the factory because they have to show to their kehila that they checked it out personally, that they saw the place, and they know. So what do? So they come and they look at the chicken. They say, oh, I see a little spot over here that there was no salt. Put on some more salt. So put on some more salt. It doesn't cost me geld. Another couple of pennies. Throw on some more salt. And somebody else, you found another little spot over here. Maybe this spot doesn't have any salt. More salt. So the whole thing ends up being piles and piles of salt. He said, totally unnecessary. You don't have to do such a thing. So he said, somebody finally knows how to salt meat that people didn't see before. They don't do it steadily. You don't need that much salt. Malicha l'kedera. Okay. I'll just tell you a second. Uvda, what happened? There was an old age home here in the city, and they said they wanted to get their chickens not salted. And the policy over here by Ravad is we don't sell meat that's not salted because the people that are not going to do it properly and they're going to end up being over nichshol and iserdam. So don't do it. So they said it's bad for blood pressure and we have people with heart conditions. So you have to, if you don't, the place was a kosher facility. They said if you don't give us unkosher the chickens, so then we're going to give up the extra, we're going to eat in the veils and treifas. A problem. So Rabbi asked for a meeting with the head doctor there. So he met. He said, "We'll meet in the kitchen." And he said, "Let me show you what it means to kasher chicken." So he showed it. First we soak it, and then so the way he would salt, he would hold his hand high up above the table and sprinkle it lightly, very very light. He says we leave it like this for an hour, then we rinse off the salt 3 times. So the doctor says, "So what's the problem?" He says, "I don't have a problem." He says, "We were told that you have a problem." He says, "I have no problem. I have no problem like this." So the MS is sometimes the problem because the place is put on too much, but they put on much more than is really necessary. Again, practically speaking, you can soak it and you get some of the excess salt. Why am I telling you all of these sipurah chacham, sipurah tzaddik? That what people often think is malicha letzli is really halachically malicha l'kedera. In other words, what they call a little bit, and it's only malicha letzli, halachically speaking, it's fine for malicha l'kedera, because the people are just using so much. And therefore, it's very difficult to differentiate halachically what is malicha l'kedera and what is malicha letzli. And therefore, with that being said, now we'll be able to understand the 4th line over here. So the din is, and the Shulchan Aruch passes like Rabbeinu Tam, that it's if it's nimlach kachshar lebishul, so then that's called already but anything less than that is fine. But the Isav Het Aruch says I feel nimlach letzli is also going to make maliach kereseach. It's also an issue. That's also enough salting. And what's pshat? This is exactly what this Aveta says. This Aveta, you remember, we have this whole group of Ashkenazi poskim, the late Achreinim. You got the Trumas Adeshin, you always have Hagos Maroi, and you have this Aveta Aruch. A number of those Achreinim we keep mentioning again and again, the Ramans are quoting. So he says that people get mixed up. So even Malicha Letzli, we have to answer and consider Malicha Kereseis. Because people are going to think it's Malicha Letzli, it's really Malicha L'Kedera. It's good enough for Malicha L'Kedera because it's the amount to be Malicha L'Kedera, which is the opinion of Rabbeinu Tam. Like your regular kasha meat, to get the blood out is already, it's a smaller amount than people think. Okay, so that's the Machaber Paskin like Rabbeinu Tam, but the Ramah is going to bring down the opinion of the Isav Aruch, that even Malicha Letzli, that we're not bucky in this shiur, and then people make mistakes. So he's machmer even such opinion. So Malicha Letzli, the merchak, the distance between this and the Nimlach L'Shimar Aruch is a difference of night and day. But nevertheless, it ends up that once you put salt on it, more than just, you have a salad and you put a little salt on it to give it some taste. Okay, so that's already even less than Nimlach L'Tzli. We don't have to worry about that. But if it's something which is more, so then we have an issue. Okay, so that's the first issue about how much salt to be used. So Allah Nifsash says, so Lamaisa, all of these 3, according to Shulchan Aruch, Allah Nifsash, Bosor Nimlach Lachshar Lebishul Nafshel Mliach Kereseach, Kol Shkenim Nimlach L'Shimar. Okay, so all of these, according to the Shulchan Aruch, are all considered Maliach L'Retzeach, but Nimlach Letzli is not. But the Ramah brings down from this as the Aruch Shim, Ein Hefsed Meruba, Tev Lachmish Nefshek L'Retzeach. Hefsed Meruba be matter, because Mikra Din, it's okay, Nimlach Letzli. But this about the Ha'aruch, you were talking about, 500 years ago, they weren't bucking. And like you say now, how bucky are people today that even the ones that know how to kasher, they're not kashering every day. It's not such a common thing. Go back to that time when the Rebbe told everybody that all the women and girls should learn how to kasher. So punk, there ended up being a whole problem with the meat, and people had to go directly to the butcher and they had to salt their own meat, to kasher it themselves. That was makdim raful amaka, that particular ring. Okay. Good. So any questions on this before we go further? No. Okay.
Hello.
Yeah. Question.
Sorry. So nimlach letzli. That's that Rama saying that the way people do the bit that's for a bishul, that is enough. What people do for tzli is enough for bishul, and that's why it's okay. Or even
correct. Many people, they're not bucky. And the difference between the different shiurim. This is a very common thing you see throughout. We see it from the Ramah, but the Ramah is usually taking it from Kadmeinim, the Rishonim before him. But in many cases, we have dinim, and along comes the Ramah and says, "Ein ono bekin." We don't have the expertise anymore to differentiate. And Manana Basre, what are we going to answer afterwards, hundreds of years later, with much less knowledge than they did in the days of the Ramah? So he said they were not bucky. And this is
the way we salt meat now when we make a dish. That's probably more than slitzli, right? Because we put in more salt than we expect it to evaporate during the.
It depends. It's very difficult to, like I say, a little bit of salt on a salad, we wouldn't call that even malichal sleep probably. But then there's people that put a lot of salt on things.
But the amount we put before we cook, like to spice up the meats.
But yeah, mistama, that would also be less. That would also be less, but it depends on the person. It's every person does it a little bit different. Everybody knows whatever you do that we used to use large amounts of salt on things.
You said nimlach.
Yeah.
You said nimlach hachshar lebishul, and then you said nimlach lekadera. Is that the same thing?
Yeah. When we say lebishul lekadera, yeah, the kadera is as opposed to sleep. You're saying the kadera, if you want to cook something in a pot, so then you have to salt it first. It's used interchangeably. Achshar lebishul, achshar lekadera is just two different ways of saying the same thing. Plus, can use them interchangeably. Okay, so let's say you have something which was salted, and you want it to be not salted anymore. You don't want it to answer something. What are you going to do with it? So obviously, if you're kashering it to get the blood out, you're going to have to rinse it off. Okay, but let's say in these other cases, when you're doing a shimmer aruch, you already salted it to get the dam out. This is done with meat that's already kashered. Just like the meat we get today, people are generally not kashering their own meat. It's already after it's been kashered to get the blood out. So then you have the salt to do some other pula. You're doing it to preserve it for long periods of time. So how are you going to now make it that it's no longer maluach? Says a pula geremesh abasak maluach. What are you going to do to it to get the salt off? So that's why I differentiate hadacha and shriya. So if it's a large amount of salt, like these first 2 days, shimur arach, shimur lederech, so you're going to have to soak it in water. Now, when it comes regular kashering, achshar lebishul, achshar legadera, then you do hadacha. So in general, the way we do it today, in a factory or a butchery, he's also going to be doing shriya b'mayim, not necessarily for such a long period of time, but he'll put it in a keli of water. But technically speaking, if you rinse it with a spray or something like that, that would also be sufficient. Hadacha, just rinsing it would be sufficient. But if it has these larger amounts of salt, it's still going to be maliach kereseach. If you do hadacha, if you just do hadacha on it, it's so salty, you're not going to get all the salt off. It's still going to be maliach kereseach. You have to do shriya in the first 2 cases. If it's just l'kadera, so then hadacha is sufficient. And then the litzli, again, the Shulchan Aruch doesn't discuss it because he considers that not maliach kereseach at all. Which is what I said before. Bring an example of, you have a face. It's a salad with lettuce and you put a little salt on it. That's not, doesn't go into this whole category, into this whole problem. Okay, so that's how something became malich l'kareseach, and also how something became ois malich kareseach. Okay, let's go into the time period now. So here you have just a general picture over here. So here you've started putting salt on it. And then we have the inyan of kedei hilach mil. So we say the zman malicha is 18 minutes. Beker adin, again, that's the main halach. We do it for an hour, but mainly we would say that 18 minutes would be shir malicha. And then we have la'achar shavar shir malicha. We have the time period after that. So the shaila is, when is a malich kareseach? Is a malich kareseach within the 18 minutes? And if so, maybe after the 18 minutes it's no longer, or is it vice versa? Do we say it's not malich kareseach in the first 18 minutes because it hasn't finished its pool of malicha? It's only after 18 minutes, and then after that, then it's malich kareseach. It seems like a very, very simple question, very, very basic question. It happens to be a machlekes rishonim. Min hakotzer lakotzer. Does it become at the first second? So let's say you have a piece of meat. You have a piece of meat. Let's take a piece of meat that was already salted. Okay, because if it's not a piece, if it wasn't already salted, then we have a problem of not a bosor b'cholav. We have a problem of dam. So let's make it the bosor b'cholav issue. You have a piece of meat that was already kashered, and now you're salting it for shiur, for example. Okay, so you put in the salt. 2 minutes later, it ends up sitting with a piece of cheese. So what happened? Is it already malich kareseach then, or it's nothing happens till after 18 minutes? What exactly is happening over here? So when does it start, and when does it finish? Ad mosai. Okay, it's ploys. Until when is going to be malich kareseach? Is it forever? There's Shulchan Aruch paskins like the Ran. Okay, the Ran says that in the first 18 minutes, eina nechshav reseach. That you need the 18 minutes, the shir malicha, that is going to be the shir resecha too. It's not going to be considered malich kareseach until after 18 minutes. Now, after 18 minutes, nechshav reseach hachi yedich is a bas mimalchik. Until you rinse off the salt from the meat, it's going to be malich kareseach. So as long as it still has the salt on it, it's going to touch the cheese or whatever. It's going to aser kadei klifa. That's what we're talking about over here. Remember, we're talking about malicha. It's cold, but malich kareseach, and it's going to aser kadei klifa. But when is that going to go on for? According to this day, it's going to go on forever. Not forever, until you rinse off the salt. Okay? That's what the Shulchan Aruch says. Comes to Ramah and says basically the precise opposite. That in the first 18 minutes, that's when it's nechshav kareseach. Davka in the first 18 minutes. After 18 minutes, it did its job already. Once it did its job already, so then be'ikar adin, we would want to say it's mutter. However, you see the Ramah is going to say only perhaps at maruba so the mitzvah yesh lahak. Okay, so where did this come from? So the background to this is a Trumas Adesh. The Ramah, we'll see soon, the next slide, we'll see already, we'll read from the Shulchan Aruch inside. The Ramah is quoting a Trumas Adesh. And the Shach takes issue with both the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah, a lengthy Shach. And the Shach, actually, it's very interesting. Like the Shach says that this whole thing is such a bilbul. I'm going to have to make a seder over here. I'm going to have to quote you the Trumas Hadeshin. I'm going to go through step by step and explains his approach, why it is he disagrees both the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah. What happened, the Trumas Hadeshin, I think I mentioned it once before. Deshin is the gematria of the number of tshuvas, and Shach brings down a few places. Trumas Hadeshin wrote himself the shailas. So you can learn from the type of shaila he wrote was precise. It wasn't, it just happened like this. We don't even know if it did happen or it didn't happen, but he wrote it in such a fashion to bring out what it is that he wanted to bring out. So the shaila over there, but Trumas Hadeshin, is that they kashered some geese. Just they shechted some geese. There was some other meat there that they were kashering. They kashered that meat, and then they kashered these geese. And then they all got mixed together, and they're sitting over there all together in the salt. And later on, they found the one of the geese was a treifa. So now we have a problem because salted together, and it was for a bris. They were making this meat. It was sudas mitzvah, and there was no shishim against the treifa. So the shaila was to ask for all the milks, or all the meat, everything together, not only the other geese, but the other meat as well. There'd mamish be nothing to eat, and it's a sudas mitzvah. So the Trumas Adeshin was matter, b'makom hefsed meruba and sudas mitzvah, and the reason it's quoted over here is that since it was already after Shir Malicha that they came in contact, so therefore Trumas Adeshin said that it's already finished its pu'ula of Malich Kereseach, and therefore it doesn't have the keach to answer anything else. That is the Trumas Adeshin. And that's the source why the Ramah says only Makam Hefsed Meruba Sudas Mitzvah. That's what the Trumas Adeshin said. But it would seem that Me'ikar Adin should be allowed 100%. And why is it that the Trumas Adeshin was being machmer? So it's sort of assumed that it's being machmer according to the day that the Shulchan Aruch brings down the other Rishon. Okay, so far so good. Along comes the Shach and says, no, not so good. This is not a proper understanding of Trumas Adeshin. You're mixing up between two different types of malicha. Don't get mixed up between the malicha l'mashal l'kiyum that we're talking about over there, l'shimur, which is done to meat that was already kashered, which is one type of pu'ula on the meat. You're taking out the excess liquid from the meat. You're not taking out blood from the meat. Okay, when you're kashering it the first time, as it was in the case of the Trumas Adeshin, you're taking the blood out of the meat. Totally different pu'ula, says the Shach. Now, what happens when the salt is? Just give you a dogma. Let's say you put salt. You had a meat that needed to be kashered, and you salted it, and you took the blood out of the meat with the salt. Fine, good. Can you take that salt and use it a second time? You can use it a second time. The salt already gave out all of its keach in order it worked to draw out the blood from the meat. So it did its job already again. So, okay, now we'll reuse the salt. We'll dry it out. We'll leave it out in the sun. It'll be dry again, and we'll use it a second time. It's not going to work. It already used out its keach the first time because in order to pull out the dam, it's a different sort of pu'ula than just taking out the stam excess water from the meat. That just hastens the process. Would happen by itself anyway. So the Trumas Adeshin, said the Shach, is only talking about a case where they were doing it for dam. Over there, they will say that after the 18 minutes that you can be makel. But you can't be makel after the 18 minutes in a regular case of meat. I don't know whatever you call the regular case, the case where it was done with the meat was already kashered, and now you're doing it for a longer period of time. Two completely different pu'ulas, says the Shach. And therefore the Shach comes along and says, well, look over here, after Shir Malicha, yeah, this whole thing, yeah, he also holds from the Trumas Adeshin. That's the case that the Trumas Adeshin was talking about. But if it's already Bosor kosher, it was already kashered, and the blood was taken out of it, and then you salted it. No, nechshav reseach ad sheyadiach. It's gonna answer things forever. And so to the Shach disagrees. He says this Ran is going against many Rishonim that says within Shir Malicha it's also Malich Kereseach, and this seems to be the opinion of other Achreinim as well, that within Shir Malicha it has the din of Malich Kereseach. So in other words, it always has before, during the 18 minutes, and after the 18 minutes, it has the status of Malich Kereseach, and it's going to prohibit something else, unless it was after salting to take out the dam, like the case of the Trumas Adeshin. So then we have a cool if it's hefsek meruba and a sudas mitzvah to allow it. That's the way the Shach ends up. You see, he disagrees with the Shulchan Aruch, with the Machaber, and the Ran, who says that during the 18 minutes, it's green over here, it's not called Milcher Seich. That he disagrees with. Says most of the Rishonim hold not like that. They hold it during the 18 minutes. It's in the process of doing its work, so therefore it's Milcher Seich. It's also Milcher Seich. What's with afterwards? So afterwards, it also continues until you take off the salt. We have a Trumas Adeshin. So he says, okay, we got the Trumas Adeshin. He's talking about the case where it was Malicha Midam. In that case, you can be Mekel, just like the Trumas Adeshin said. So now let's see it inside the Shulchan Aruch. So now we have Sifhei. And we're going to see within the Lashon of the Machaber, we're going to see all of these three cases. Remember, we wanted to know how much salt is considered Maliach Keraseach. And then we want to know when does it start Maliach Keraseach, and then when does it finish Maliach Keraseach. All of these three things we're going to see here in the Machaber Ramah. So Sifhei, Maliach she'eina yochel yochel malchus milche. Milche, malchus. So this is, again, Lashon HaGemara, without a definition of what it means. So it has to be Eina Nechol Machmas Malchi in order to be considered salt to be Maliach Keraseach. Now, what is that? Dahainu Ka'ein Maliach Shemelchon L'Kadeira. So that's the opinion of who? Anybody remember? Got too many names.
Rabbeinu Tam.
Otazei. Yeah. Rabbeinu Tam. B'shah Kadei Malicha L'Kadeira. And then, when is it going to be Maliach Keraseach? Only after it went through the time period of Malicha L'Kadeira. Okay? So after that, we're going to have Maliach Keraseach. And how long is it going to go on for? Kozman Shalehi Diche. As long as you didn't rinse off the salt, Mikra Ein Nechem Machmas Malche. So during that time period, and that's what we saw earlier, so that's the opinion of Machaber. So after it went through the Shiur of Malicha L'Kadeira, and until you rinse it, then it's called Maliach Keraseach. That's the Machaber. Okay, and let's skip to Ramah a second. We'll come back to it in a minute. And the Machaber continues. Okay, this is a long sif. We have a few different sections over here in Machaber Ramah. And if you salted it in such a way that people do when they're going on a trip, then I feel hadach is not enough. Rinsing is not enough. Even after you rinsed it, it's still considered to be inedible because it's too salty. Because as long as you didn't soak it in water, it still is considered to be Maliach Keraseach, lesser kadei klifa. And it's going to aser kadei klifa until you soak it in water. And that is the opinion of the Machaber. On comes the Ramah. Let's go back to the Ramah. There's an opinion that says that once it's already gone through the Shiur Malicha after the 18 minutes, it's no longer called a Reseach. Yeah, we'll say it a Godel. Sorry, good. Look again, perhaps in Meruba, we'll say a Sudas Mitzvah. Yesh lismach hamakil. Then you can rely on the lenient opinions and say that even though the salt was not rinsed off, nevertheless, there's no Maliach Keraseach, and therefore the treifa did not answer the other pieces, and therefore they were able to have fleish barasuda. If you don't have this Indian, these mitigating factors, have some meruba and the sudas mitzvah, so then you can't be mekel. And you have to pass like the Machaber, and that's what we had over here, the opinion of the Ramah. And we said the Shach said you're mixing up two different things. Trumas Adeshin is talking about Achshara Midam. And really, we should want to be Mekel all together. And then the Shaila is why you need to have some Murub so this mitzvah. Okay, so he's not going to be so Mekel to go over against that. But if it's not to get the blood out, so then attack it's always going to be Maliach L'Reseach.
That carve out of the Ramah, if you're going to have some meruba vihu, it means it has to be both Hesed and the Sudas Mitzvah.
Yeah, that's what the Trumas Adesh and Pask in that case. So again, he constructed his case. Evidently, we can assume, I don't know if it's a good assumption or not, but it's a b'diuk. If it's like the Shach says, that he constructs the case, he constructed a case that it was both Hefsed Meruba and it was a Sudas Mitzvah. And now, the Ramah, I don't know how to put this, maybe it does some house cleaning, that you might want to make a mistake with some of these dinim of L'chatchila and B'diavad, let's say salting from one side. Can we be mekel if it was only salted from one side? Is that a kula? So he says, and even if you didn't salt the meat properly from both sides, like you're supposed to do l'chatchila, and you only did it from one side, so maybe think so. Maybe there's no maliyah over here because you didn't salt it the proper way. So the Ramah says, no. As long as there was enough salt on that one side that it met the requirement that one would normally use to kasher meat, it's also called a reseach. And why is that? Because bekiradin, if you salted it from one side, the meat is still kasher. So over there, it's a kula. Over here, it ends up being a chumrah, even though it's only from one side. And you might want to think that it's not so salted. It's not going to make a problem, but it does make a problem because bekiradin, it's also good. But if it was not salted to the extent that like the Machaber said, kadei malich l'kadeira, mechshav tzeinin. I feel a nimlach mishnei tzdadim, even if you put on both sides, but it only had a little bit of salt. So then you don't need to worry about it, and hadach is going to be good enough. However, v'yesh emrim says the Ramah, danan ein bekim b'davar, that we are not experts in determining this shiur. That says orach. Orach is the Israel orach. And therefore we should consider, even if it was only the last shiur, the smallest amount melichul tzli, we should consider that also the reseich. That's the yeshem. He's quoting the yeshem. What's the psak? So the psak is teiv lahachmer b'makom shein hefsed. So it's proper to be machmer if there's no hefsed meruba, to be machmer like this of a heter, because we are not baki. So this heter says we're not baki, and the Ramah said l'chatchil you should do like that. But hefsed meruba, then you don't have to. Okay, so that's the basic picture of Elam and Shana. Questions? Ready to go to Nefesh?
By Nimlach Mitzad Echad, does it make a difference which side touches the greener or whatever?
So you're asking, okay, so you're asking a good question, which I'm going to have to do a little research on. So you're asking if it was salted, let's say on the east side of the Bosor, and the west side of the Bosor doesn't have any salt, and then the west side of the Bosor touches the Kvina. So I'm going to have to look into it to make sure, but I would imagine yes, because the melach, why is it that the west side of the meat you're allowed to eat? Because the pu'ul of the salt is pulling out the blood even from the mekemus arachek. That's the keach, the meiredik keach of salt that has the power to pull out that dam. And that pu'ula that it's having, and as we'll see later on, it's even stronger. We say even it was only maliach for storage, where it's not even pulling up blood, it's just taking out some moisture, where it's not such a strong pu'ula. That's also considered to be maliach kariseya. Over here, it's pulling out the blood from the west side too. It's cold to the touch, but it doesn't matter. The vert is not whether it's cold to the touch. The whole thing's cold to the touch, even the side where the salt is. So I would imagine that would also answer it, but I would not say for sure until looking into it.
I think
Good
you said
question.
this before.
Any other questions?
With melicha kariseach, is that, does it ever make the whole, if it's in the bottom, does it make the whole piece that falls on it? I'll search just the klippa. When it's melicha.
Perfect segue to the next piece. That's the inyan of nefesh. Next subject.
I just wanted to ask one question. Where can I look up this thing from the Rebbe with the organizing thing by Elam Shah and Nefesh?
B'chal, the Rebbe mentions it many sichos. I don't remember one particular place. The Rebbe, I just I don't remember reading it. I remember hearing it many times. The Rebbe would say this. Today it's easy enough. You make a search. No, you have Eitzer Chachma, then for sure. There's a sale now on Eitzer Chachma. But they have on Chabad library sites. You have you can go through Teres Menachem over there. You have Zvadias over there, the Fabrengens. Just put it in. Put in Sefer Yitzira, Elam Shana Nefesh. I'm sure you'll come up with a bunch of results. Okay, so this is the shach that we spoke about. Mash Evi Ramosh Eish Lagel Bevsem Rubim Mitzvah. So this mitzvah. Who rakba Bosor Shenimlach Leitzit Dame. That was the case in Trumas Hadeshin. When you're salting it in order to take out the blood, because the power of the salt to accomplish anything has already been weakened because it was busy taking out the blood. But if you're salting the meat after the meat was kasher already, it still holds on to its keich to make malich karaseich until you rinse it off from the surface. So that the Ramah doesn't say that. That the Shach pastures like that based on the psak of the Ramah, based on Trumas Hadeshin. So the Shach explains ganz harichas, and the Shach quotes also the Trumas Hadeshin there inside. Fine. Let's now get to the type of meat we're talking about over here. It says Sif Hey and Vav, because really in Sif Vav it says it explicitly. But let's there are a number of issues when we're talking about the type of meat and the type of dairy. So we have Bosor Gevina Maluchim Yavesh. We have one issue to look at: are they dry or are they wet? Now, even if it's wet from water, it's called dry. So this is like, what's pshat? What is that supposed to be? So the pshat is as follows: that when you salt something, it takes out liquid from whatever it's salting. So when we're speaking about the moisture, we're talking about moisture that was pulled out as a result of the salting. Whether it's bosor, or whether it's meat, or whether it's cheese, so it's pulling out some liquid. That is the liquid that we're talking about. If you have a dry piece of cheese and a dry piece of meat and you sprinkle some water on it, halachically that's called yavesh. Because what we're talking about over here is the ability of the salt to convey taste from one to the other and answer the thing next to it, could they clip it? So the water, it's not just the water. Some cases, we'll see later on that we say one keli touches another keli. You have a hot milchak keli, a fleshak keli. Does the time go to another one? You need some moisture in between. So then we don't care what kind of moisture it is. Moisture can come from anywhere. But over here we're talking about pu'ulas hamelach, talking about the effect of the salting. So it has to be the sort of liquid which was a pu'ula of the salt. That's why it says even if it's just moist, that's not the type of moisture we're talking about. So in general, the cloud is that if everything is dry, the taste is not going to travel. So that's one thing we need to look at. We need to look at if it's wet and it's dry, or dry. And then even if it's wet, we need to know where the moisture comes from. Because if the moisture was external, then it doesn't really count for our case. That's one thing we need to look at. Then we want to look at, you have this middle box here, Bosor Gvina Meluchim Kachushim. Or the left box, Bosor Gvina Meluchim Shmein. Is it kachush, something which is not oily, fatty, or is it a davar shamein, which has oil or fats in it, which enables the taste to travel faster and further? Okay, so let's say we have two pieces that touch each other and they will dry. So the din is, just like we learned at the beginning of the simon, you have two cold things, you have cold bosor, you have cold cholov, you have to do adacha. The place where they touch, you have to do adacha. You have to rinse it with water. Over here, it's salted and maliach keraseach. Yeah, maliach keraseach. But we're talking about the pool that has to be when there's some liquid there, which was a result of the malicha. And if you don't have that, it's not going to ask to get klifa. Yeah, the hadach is good enough. Now, if it does have some of that moisture there, and the bosor and gavina are kachush, so then you have to take it klifa. However, if they're davar shamein, so then all the bets are off, and you need shishim. You need shishim. The plus klifa we'll talk about in a minute, but you need shishim. It's going to answer the whole thing. So in other words, if you had this very large piece of meat, for example, and a relatively small piece of cheese, and they touched each other, and it's davar kachosh, so then it's still going to it can only go so far. The melech can only go so far. It only goes to the klifa. That's how much it's going to propel the taste. Let's say the meat was salted and the cheese was not, or even if they were both salted, so it's not going to go farther than kadei klifa. However, if it's a davar shamein, so the shamnunis carries the taste further. Lashon Gemara, it says that it goes even from mirosh oznei, from the tip of the ear, it goes all the way to the tail of an animal. So the shamnunis carries it throughout the whole thing. So therefore, if it's a davar shamein, it's going to answer the whole piece, unless there's shishim. If it's less than 1/60th, then we'll say it's both of a shishim. Now, so this idea that it travels through the whole piece of cheese or piece of meat, whatever it is that we're talking about here, or both, sounds like a chumrah, but if you think about it for a minute, it's also a kula, because the idea of kadei klifa, we're not looking at it. Yes, shishim, not shishim, doesn't matter. If they touch each other and there's salt on the point of contact, so again, the answer is kadei klifa. Over here, we're saying if there's shishim, then we're going to say the din of bittul b'shishim. But what about the place they touched? Does it take away that chumrah? So that's what the plus klifa means. That even though we say that since it's a davar shamein, it's going to spread out throughout the entire piece of meat, the entire piece of cheese. That's only l'chumrah we're going to say such a thing. We're going to say that it's going to answer the whole piece unless there's shishim. If there's shishim, we're not going to answer the whole piece. But we still have to take a cliff. Either way, you have to take off the cliff. In other words, for sure, okay, what's the hezbollah of that? We'll skip the different ways of explaining why it's like that. The simplest is the Beker Adin is that it always asks to take cliff. We're chaysher, davar shamein, we're machmed that it could also go further. Therefore, it's only l'chumra, not l'kula, that we're going to measure against shishim. We're not going to say it's only if bottle for shishim, so then you don't have to take a deklif. We don't say that. We say that you need shishim, not to answer the whole piece, and you're also going to have to take off kadei klif. Okay, lamaisa, very, very important Ramah. Ein anu bekim ben kochas l'shamein. We're not bucky. What's kochas mut shamein? Ubachol davar sheshayich shamnunis dina kishamein. That anything that's shayich shamnunis, then it's we treat it like it's a davar shamein, and we need shishim. Otherwise, it's going to answer the whole thing. What does it mean sheshayich shamnunis? A matzah is not shayich shamnunis. We have other cases where a loaf of bread, vegetables, is not shaykh shamnunis, such a thing. We're talking about pieces of meat, pieces of cheese, things like that, shaykh shamnunis. And then we have this chumrah of the Ramah, and this is like another example of ein on a bakin and the drastic effects it has on halacha. So I have a message over in the chat. When salted and it's fatty, does it need 60 against the whole piece, or just 60 against the part that touched? So if both of them were davar shamein, so then you need 60 against the whole piece. Yeah. When one was salted and one not, we didn't really speak about yet. We're speaking now in general about both of them being salted, but one is maluach and one is tafel. We're going to speak about soup.
What we're not bucked by us, being Kachosh Shamim. Before then, by the Gemara, they did know, and there's examples that they give, but we just don't know the Shiur or something.
Yeah. Basically, I mean, if you have all of these halachas, they're saying this applies only if it's kochot, but if Shaman Din is not like that, so they knew what they were talking about. But many things like this, many cases in halacha. I mean, the whole Hilchas Treifus is full of cases like this. I mean, Treifus Areya, we have to be thankful that we're not bucky, otherwise we wouldn't be able to drink milk. I mean, if I can't, maybe if we were, because the majority of the behemoths, they're shechting today on treifa. So how are you drinking milk? So the main answer is given is because we're not so bulky, so we're matter of things that are not really treif. Okay, how true that is a whole discussion, but we're not learning. That's another simmer Shulchan Aruch. We're not learning that simmer. Let me just finish this section. Yeah. So here. You see, I guess this blue aura surrounding the piece of cheese is Kadei Clipper. I assume that's what's happening over here. So, yeah. So both of them were covered with salt. So if they touched, that was that animation, I guess. So the taste will go from one to the other and answer both of them. But answer both of them because they klifa, unless it's shaykh shamnunis, which is why the whole piece of meat turned black over there. I guess the shalosh klips atmeis. So if it was davar shamein or shaykh, certainly meat and cheese are both shaykh shamnunis. So therefore, since we're not bucky, we're going to end up answering the entire piece. Yeah. And that's why you say shishim plus klifa. So even if we do have bittul b'shishim, so we're going to have to be mashar b'kulei, but nevertheless, you're still going to have to take a day klifa. I don't know whether this peeler is going to work on a piece of meat exactly, but you get the idea that you're going to. We say this idea that it goes through the whole thing. We say it l'chumra. We don't say it b'kula. I want to just move through. Because I think we're going to run out of time over here unless I pick up the pace a bit. Okay, so let's say you have pieces which are kochush. These pieces don't look particularly kochush to me, but imagine for a second they're kochush. Fine. So we learned that if the malicha, that when they touch each other, so it asks kadei chlifa. Let's say it was roasted meat. So roasted meat. So this you have a whole discussion in Simukofei that if you have, for example, a treifa piece of meat, which is the dark colored one, and a kosher piece of meat, and they were both roasted and they touch each other, so then you're gonna have to take a day natila. If it's a davar shamin, then it answers the whole thing if you don't have shishim. But if it's a davar kochush, so then it answers kadei natila. That's why when you have anytime if you have a shaila and a matzah, for example, you have a kfula or something nefucha. We don't see too many nefuchas today. You have a kfula, you do see. In any case, from the place that was no good, you have to take a day natila. A day natila, 2 centimeters, width of a finger. But if it's maliyach, you take much less. You only have to take a day klifa. The point since the Maliach Haraseach only answers Kedei Klifa. Now, okay, so what's the story where you have things that are not alike? So here you have the tzliya, you have on the right hand side, you see the little steam lines over there, that the right-hand side is hot, and the meat, I'm talking about the tzli over here, so the piece on the right touches the piece on the left, so the piece on the right is hot, and the piece on the left is cold. So this was, the one on the right was roasted, and the one on the left is not roasted. So what's going to happen? So say, acham mavliya b'tzeinim, b'tzeinim mavliya b'cham. So we say that since this has heat, each one is going to donate so to speak, its tam. Mavliya, Beileya means to absorb. Mavliya is to cause to be absorbed, to give out. So the right-hand side, which is the cham, the hot one, is going to be mavliya, but saying it's going to give taste into the cold one. And I mean, let's say one of them was not kasher, it's full of blood, or one of them was a nevela, treifa, whatever the case is. So it's going to give the taste into the tzeining. And so too, let's say the one on the right was kosher and the one on the left was a treifa, or it wasn't kosher, whatever the case is. So as they touch, it's also going to give its taste. You're going to have to take kadei natila from the hot one. So the cold gives a taste to the hot gives a taste to the cold, that we understand. The cold gives a taste to the hot. What's pshat? How does cold give taste to the hot? Because it got warmed up from the hot, and it gave taste over into the cold.
Why is that different than what we learned last week with Tata Gavar?
So over here, there's no tata and ilo.
They're side to side.
Yeah. That's the simple answer. There's more, but that's the pashta teretz. But we're quoting it over here, ima cham tachten, then the bli lagamri, like we said before, from tata gavar, ima kara tachten, and then it's kadei klifa. That's what we learned before about tata gavar and sivdala. Fine. The main thing we're learning over here, the chiddush, is what's with malicha. So the klal is as follows. The one that has the salt on. So here the right hand piece has salt on it, the left hand piece does not. So when we say asus kadei klifa, that means that the taste of the salted one is going to go into the unsalted one. But the taste of the unsalted one will not go into the salted one. So in other words, you're going to have to take kadei klifa over here. Of which one? You're going to have to take kadei klifa on the left-hand one, because it absorbed taste from the salted one. However, you don't have to take the klifa from the salted one. That you're gonna have to do adacha. They touch each other, you have to do adacha. But the melech does not go both ways. So it goes, and this is the Gemara speaks about tar maliach v'tamei tafel. So let's say the one on the right-hand side was kosher and the one on the left-hand side was not. So then it's not going to be an issue, because you're going to have to take klifa from the tummy. We're not using the tummy anyway. Who cares? We don't take klifa from it. It's anyway b'chal lakevel tashlich anesim. But you're not going to eat it. But do we have to worry that the davar tummy on the left-hand side gave taste into the kosher piece, and you have to take off kadei klipa? The answer is no. You have to adacha. It only goes from the salted piece to the unsalted piece, and not vice versa. Okay? So you have, for example, this is this issue. The shayla is whether this is l'chatchila b'diavad. This is other simanim in Shulchan Aruch, not really discussed over here, but it says over there, ein malicha l'kelim, for example. So this is one of the Yesedas. So you have, for example, in a cheese company, I just mentioned this briefly, and I think we're going to take a break after this, because we've been going on for a long time already. It's almost more than halfway through. Let's say you have a cheese company was making chalav cheddar cheese. So maliach kereseach, they salt the cheese, and it absorbs the taste of the treifa cheese. It could be chalav cheese, it could be gvinas hakum cheese, whatever it is. The taste goes into the kelim. Now, let's say you want to make kosher cheese there. You want to make chal kosher cheese. You want to make chal Yisrael cheese. So we say in general, that although the taste from the salted, so then they're going to clean it up. There's going to be no salt left over here, and then you're going to put the kosher cheese onto the table, and you're going to salt it. There's tam, there's taste that was absorbed from the non-kosher production. So then we say that the taste is going to go from the salted one to the unsalted one. It's not going to go from the unsalted one to the salted one. So in the case you have on the slide, it's like the left-hand side is a keli. So we say that it's not going to answer that cheese. And the Rama says this is only a din b'diavad, it's not a din l'chatchila when it comes to kelim. Ramataka speaks about cheese. She is making a change, but the essence of it didn't change. Anyway, so that's a practical application that you see today all the time in the production world. So hamaluach mavliya b'tafel. Tafel is the unsalted ones. The hamaluach is the right inside, the one that was salted. That will give taste into the one that's not salted. Tafel ain't a mavliya b'maluach. But the one that's unsalted is not going to cause taste to be absorbed into the other one. So this is an interesting din over here. The Shulchan Aruch over here says that there's no difference. We don't say tatog gavar about malicha. We say tatog gavar when it comes to heat. We don't say tatog gavar lagabe malicha. It's a machlekes rishonim. And elsewhere in Shulchan Aruch, the Beis Yosef also brings down that both opinions over here. But here he says some, and he just says without elaborating that this is the din. We got 2 more slides left over here. Let's just finish the subject. Sorry, we're going longer than usual, but we'll just finish it and we'll be left with Siv Zayin after the break. Okay, so in this case over here, we have a salted piece of meat and an unsalted piece of cheese. So what's going to be the din? Where's the taste going to go from? From the meat to the cheese, or the cheese to the meat, or both?
Meat to cheese.
Meat to cheese, yeah. So therefore, hagvina atfela asura, and a basar maluach mutter. You're gonna have to adacha like any other cases of cold things that touch yourself. You're gonna have to adacha, but you're not gonna have to take kedei natila if it's kochush and asur the whole thing if there's no shishim, if it's a davar shamin. Now the shaila is when it comes to a davar tzol. Yeah. So this really needs some more elaboration. But let's take first over here. You had unsalted milk, which is usually the way you serve milk, right? So you have the chalav tafel, and it fell on bosor maluach. So what do we want to say? We want to say that the chalav tafel is going to be also you have to ask a day clipper of milk. And then we discussed last time 2 weeks ago. What do you do? How do you take a day clipper on cheese? We can do. How do you take a day clipper on milk? To take cliff on milk is a tough job. So what do you do? And then we had all machlekes achreinim. Do we say that you have to measure shishim against the kedei klifa of the meat, or do we say that since it's not shayach klifa, we had all machlekes achreinim then, and we said chatchili should be machmer, you have it not. But the shayla over here, if it's a davar tzol like this, so then the fact that it's a davar tzol and it's liquid, it's possible to get absorbed into the meat. So that's where we differentiate between a davar meitz, like you said before at the beginning, and a davar tzol, and we're going to aser kedei klippa from the meat as well if it's a davar tzol. And if it's vice versa, let's say the milk was salty and the meat was not. So then what do we say? We're going to want to say they're going to have to take a day klippa from the meat because the salted one went to the maluach, went into the tafel. Over here, the milk is the maluach and the meat is the tafel. So we're going to have to take from the basara tafel aser. You're going to have to take a day klippa if it's kochush. And again, if it's a davar shamein or we're not bucky, so it would be the case when we're talking about meats, and it's going to aser the whole thing if there's no shishim. What's with the chalav? And then there's chalav lying around over there. You're allowed to drink the chalav or not. That's a machlekes aposkim. Shach kosev lamaisa tzorachia, but therefore yesh lahachmer. Again, they're not such a common case, but that is the din. So I think we're going to take a 10-minute break at this point, and then we're going to learn the Shulchan Aruch of all the cases we just learned, and we're going to Siv Zayin. Okay, so 10-minute break. So I have 8:31 Eastern time. So 8:41, Mirz Hashem, we shall continue. Take a break for us. So the recording in progress lady is back. So now this is sort of the summary of what we learned before. Summary, and this is the Shulchan Aruch, the basis of what we learned before. So this is that same Siv Hey. This Siv Hey is like 3 separate sections. Each one has a significant, even in length, Machaber with a lengthy Ramah. So we did the first part. Now we'll do the second part. Vein chiluk ben meliach elyon v'tafel tachten lemeliach tachten v'tafel elyon. It doesn't matter which one is on top. Again, the meliach is the one that's salted. The tafel is the one that's not salted. We don't say tatog over. As we mentioned, this is Machaber just brings down this opinion. Other places he brings down both. The principle is that the one which is salted gives taste into the one that's not salted and does not absorb from it. Hilchach, Bosor gvina hamaluchim. If you have salted meat and salted cheese, both of them are salted. Shenogu zebazah. What's the din? They touch each other. Tzarach likleif shneyam makom negiosim. You have to take klippa from the point of contact from both of them, because the salted one gives to the other one. So the meat gave to the cheese, and the cheese gave to the meat. You have to take klippa from both. Let's say only one of them was salted and the other one was not. So the one that was not salted, you have to take a layer off because it absorbed from the salted. And the one that's salted did not absorb anything from the one which is not salted. Why do you have to adacha? Because any two cold things, even if they're not salted, you have to adacha. Along comes the Ramah. But there are those that say, and again, the reasoning behind it is basically by a dover shaman, that since we're not sure what's shaman and what's not shaman, that all of these cases of malicha we're going to be mashayim b'shishim. B'ayin lakam sim kofei ketzadei again, and that's what we mentioned over there from Simon Kofei. And this that we say, that when the kosher one, again, this is the lashon which is used over there by fish and other cases in the Gemara, tar and tameh, one of those kosher ones not kosher, it's not a question of Bosor b'chalav, but it's the same principle we're using over here. So this, that the kosher one was salted and the non-kosher one was not salted, so we say it's shari, so obviously the tameh is tameh. We're talking about that the tar, the kosher fish that was salted, came in contact with a non-kosher fish. Hainu shatame yavish. That's talking about the tame one was yavish. Avalim hu davar tzolol nesar atar. But if it's a davar tzolol, like we brought in the case of the milk, so then it's going to answer the tar one also. That was the third case that we brought before. That if it's a davar tzolol, then it's a problem. That since it's salted, the kosher one is salted to the extent that it's not nechel machmas milchai, so it's going to absorb the yisr, and both of them are going to be both of them become muscle. That's the chumrah of a davar tzolol that we discussed in the last slide, and that slide came from this Ramah. But dafke shatar lachtzas, but the tar one has to have some of its own. Over there, the tameh with tzolol, so it's going to answer the tar. But the tar has to be at least a little bit of moisture. If it's totally dry, so it's not going to absorb from the davar lach, which is next to it. So that's the additional chumrah that we have of davar tzol. But if they're both, back to the machaber, if they're both dry, even they're salted, or they're wet, and that was the case we brought in the introduction, that there's some moisture there, but the moisture was not from the malicha. The moisture was from external source, from water, something like that. Halachically, that's still considered to be yavesh and sagi badacha. And then it's going to be sufficient just to rinse the point of contact. Fine. Now, this last piece of Ramah is a different din, not directly connected to what we learned before, but I mentioned it also in the introduction. That's the special category of tzir, the liquid which is going to come out of the meat as a result of malicha. And so since it's a pu'ula of the malicha and there's liquid that's coming out of it, it also has the power to answer something else. That's a special chumrah we have over there by tzir. And that tzir, it doesn't even have to be dam. It could be after a malicha ladam. The tzir that comes out, it's not asim mishum dam, but it's going to have the chumrah of a davar nimlach. So called tzir mi bosor nimlach. So any of the tzir, the liquid that's going to come out of the meat that's being salted, Even if it's just a little bit. Here we're not saying we're not bucket between what's likadet and what's litzli. Let's say everybody agrees that litzli. It's just a little bit of salt, but that little bit of salt took out a little bit of liquid, took out a little bit of tzir. And since it was the pool of the malicha, chashuv reisayach, that tzir is considered to be reisayach v'lachin. And therefore, if some of that liquid came out of the meat and it dripped onto some cheese, you're going to have to take a clipper from the cheese. Or even on the keli, you're going to have to take a clipper from the keli. It's going to ask for the keli. Aser, it's going to prohibit it. And I feel b'makam sheina bosor aser. So even if it's not going to ask the meat, because it's not considered to be reseich, like the case that it's mamish litzli, so it's not so much salt that we're going to call the meat is maliach reseich. It's a very interesting din. So the whole klolos hamatzah with this piece of meat is it's not considered to be maliach reseich. But since the little bit of salt that was there had a pu'ula, that it took out this liquid, it took out this tzir, that tzir itself has the din of maliach reseich. But tzir shel bosor sha'eser shenafal ala kli, and the tzir from that came out of this meat and it fell on a keli, it's orach hagola. You have to kasher the keli, you have to agol's kelim, you have to put in boiling water. V'imu kli cheres. And if it fell onto a ceramic keli, so you can't kasher ceramic, it's orach shvira, you have to break the keli. Let's say it didn't fall on the whole keli, it only fell on one part of the keli. But kli yetzu you have to take the clipper. So how do you take a day clipper? So if it's a kli yetz, just take out a tool and take off a layer of the wood, and then it's fine. You only took a day clipper. Okay, so that's the end of Sif Hey, and Sif Vav we've been discussing the whole time. In the Mechaber, it's a separate Sif. When is it that we say that it only asks Maliach Reseich, only Kadei Klippa, Kashein Shum Achas Mechaticha Shmeina? Then neither one of them was fatty. Sheim Ayis Shmeina Kulasura. Because if even one of them was Shmeina, then the whole thing is Asur. Bekain Chaver Tasura Kulam Mipnei Shuman Mefapeya, that the Shuman has the power of infiltrating, so to speak, the other piece and making it penetrate that piece as well. Okay, so that is our summary of learning inside Siman, Hey, and Vav, and now we go on to the new topic, Sif Zayin. Very, very fascinating Sif. And in order to help focus us, imagine that you have a leaky container of milk in your fridge. And some of the milk dripped out. Some milk dripped out on a piece of meat. It's in the fridge, everything is cold. So imagine it dripped onto a piece of chicken. Dripped onto a piece of raw chicken, or dripped onto a piece of cooked chicken. Fell on a piece of spiced chicken, seasoned chicken. What's going to be the din? Are we going to get away with hadacha, or we're going to need something more? What's the din? So that we're going to see over here. So we're going to go back to the same Gemara. Remember, we skipped the last 3 lines. So now we're going to learn those last 3 lines. So if you remember over here, what happened? We had this bar guzla, we had this bird, and it fell into the kadat, the kimcha, you remember, fell into the kutach. And since the kucha didn't have so much salt, Rav Chinina said it's okay. All you have to do is hadacha. Because cassava, start from cassava, that this that Shmuel said Maliach Reseich, and it prohibits Kadei Klifa, Hani Mila Hechadein and Nechmach Mismalchi. It means that it had a significant amount of salt. Aval Hai Kutcha, but this Kutcha Hani Nechmach Mismalchi, that it doesn't have so much salt. So therefore, you don't have to be machmer and do more than hadach. Now we're going to have another 2 lines. I'm going to treat each one of these 2 lines separate. Bahani mili, this that we said it's good enough hadacha. Avol tzoli boy klifa. So when do we say that it's sufficient that the bar guzla only that fell into the kutach is good enough? Hadacha is only when it was chai. But if it was a roasted bar guzla, then you're gonna have to take a cliff. Okay, stop here a second before we learn the next line. So what exactly does this mean? What does chai mean? So chai, what's the difference in chai and tzoli? So tzoli means it was pashtus. You could say chai means raw, and tzoli means roasted. However, there's another way you could learn it, because when you say something is chai, it has two qualities. One is not cooked, and the other is it's cold. So what is the difference between these two cases? Is it something which is cold as opposed to something hot? Or is it something raw as opposed to something cooked? Let's say something was solid, let's say that something was roasted, and now it's cold. Okay, so the din is over here, hani milichai. When is it good enough hadacha? When it's high. If it's solid, then it's not good enough hadacha. You have to take a declif, even though it only fell into the kutach, and the kutach not so salty. Okay. What would be the din if you had a hot piece of meat fell into the kutach? What's the din? What do you have to do?
They clip on it.
They could take cliff. So if you learn that chai is cold and sli is hot, so does that fit with our din of tatagova? The kutach is on the bottom and it's cold. So what are you going to have to do with this bird? What are you going to have to do? No? You have to do a cliff. Is there any chiddush in this din? There's not really a chiddush in this din. If you learn that sli means hot, what would be if something which was, you had roasted meat, you have leftover from your barbecue chicken, and now it's cold. It's in the fridge and the milk dripped on it, or it fell into the kutach, whatever the case happened to it. So what's going to be the din? Is going to be good enough hadacha, or you're going to have to take a cliff. So if you learn that chai is raw and sli is roasted, even if it's cold, so then you're going to have to take a klippa even though the chicken is cold, because it says soli. But if you're going to learn that soli means hot and chai means cold, so you have a cold piece of chicken, so we don't care that once upon a time it was roasted. It's barbecue chicken left over in the fridge. It's called chai, and the hadacha is going to be good enough. When do you need kadei klippa? You're going to need that only if it's hot. Okay, that is a machlekes rishenim. What are the Gemara talking about? What's the difference between chai and soli? So machlekes rishenim, does chai mean raw or does chai mean cold? Machlekes rishenim, 2 days. Okay, let's see inside. I'm going to get to the second line in a minute. So the Gemara says like this: Bosor chai shenafel lakutach mutter after hadacha. Okay. Bosor tzoli shenafel lakutach tzarich klip. Okay. But what exactly does that mean? Okay, we didn't learn that yet. Okay, I guess if we're going to do the PowerPoint, I have to learn the next line too. We're just going to read it. I'm not going to explain it because it complicates. It's complicated as enough as is, but your half cup, it's simple. The wording is complicated. Let's learn the next line of Gemara. So the first line of Gemara, Hani Melech Chai Aval Tzoli by Klippa. Now another din. You see, by the way, it has the little letters over here. Both of these are quoted La'alach Shulchan Aruch. Soon see. V'is by Pili, and if it has holes, what is Shulchan Aruch? B'koyim. In other words, it's not totally smooth. There's crevices. So if it has pili, kuli aser, then the whole thing is aser. Even clip is not enough. And if it had spices, then also it's kulei asura. This is the Gemara paskins. Im yesh b'koyim, matuvo, also kulei. So that's what the Gemara says, and that's the psak halacha. The shaila is, what exactly are we talking about? So the shaila on the first line, I explained to you what the shaila is. What's the difference between chai and soli? Is it heat or whether it's been cooked or not? Even if it's cooled off now. The big shaila over here, v'is bei pili kula. Who's the bay? Which case is it talking about over here? It's talking about the chai. It's talking about the soli. It's not so clear. In other words, is this going back to the general case and ignoring this first modification? In other words, does it have to be tzoli and with holes? Or if even would be raw and it has holes? Or let's say you have a raw piece of chicken, you're going to make some sort of marinated chicken breast. And you got a raw thing over there and it's matuva v'tavlin. And then a drop of milk falls on it. So it's a cold piece of chicken sitting there in the fridge. You have the leaky container of milk and it dripped on it. Oh, we're going to say kula asur, and clip is not going to be good enough. Even not only hadach is not enough, even clip is not enough. Kula asur is talking about chai, or maybe it's only talking about soli. What's going on? Big machlekes, three-way machlekes rishain. The shach is very, very interesting shach, very sadistic shach. Shach goes through all three opinions, and we have a psak from the Alter Rebbe actually on this, Nilchus Pesach. So let's get to work and figure out what's going on over here. The Shulchan Aruch mainly discusses 2 of the 3 days in the Rishonim. The Shach brings a 3rd day, and based on the 3rd day, he goes more. We have Machlekes Mechaber Ramah. Basically, the Mechaber is going to one of the Rishonim. The Ramah is going to learn like another one of the Rishonim. But the Shach says there's a 3rd group of Rishonim, so he's going to be even more machmir than the Ramah. And it looks like the Alter Rebbe, basically that 3rd Rishon is the one that the Alter Rebbe takes is chayshish for. So who are the Rishonim? Okay, so first day we have, there are many Rishonim. So one made the slide, named it after the Ravid and the Rashba, says as follows. Poshet. Bosor chai shnof lakutach moter is talking about cold meat. Bein chai, bein soli. Doesn't matter what happened to this bar guzla. We don't care whether it was cooked before or not cooked before. We don't care its history. We care about its temperature. It's Bosor tzeinen, Bosor tzeinen, good enough hadach. Okay. Now, Bosor tzoli, that means you roasted it, and after it was roasted, it fell into the kutach. Why is they calling it tzoli? It was tzoli yesterday. It's freshly tzoli. It's talking about Bosor eseich. So it was hot. It fell into the kutach. The kutach is not so salty. So it's a regular din. Everything, none of this is news to us. We already knew that 2 things cold they touch. We know from the beginning of the siman that you have to do adacha. What happens if one of them is hot? We say tatog over. Okay, tatog over. Over here, what was the tata? Was the kutach. The kutach was cold. So hot soli fell into it. So then you have to take a deklifa. We said bala porta, that it absorbs a little bit by the time it finally cools off. So therefore you have to take a deklifa. No news according to this day so far. The chiddush is the end. Im yesh b'koyim. So then also kulei, and it's talking about, but it's this same Bosor eseich that you only have to take a deklifa because tatagavar. But if it has b'koyim and places where this kutach can get inside, or the matuva v'tavlin, so then it's more chomer. It can answer the whole thing. The clip is not going to be enough. That's the opinion, one opinion in the Rishonim. So what's the din over here? If you have the milk, let's take again. What are we talking about? We have some piece of chicken, raw chicken, not spiced, sitting there in the fridge. The milk falls on it. What's the din according to this? We'll talk about 2 cases. We're going to talk about a piece of raw chicken and a piece of roasted chicken. We'll leave the matuba v'tavlin out of the picture now. Let's talk about a case of raw chicken and a case of roasted chicken. Both are cold in the fridge. What's the din according to this first day? Rabbi said milk dripped on the chicken. Hadacha. Hadacha on the raw chicken. Well, what's with the roasted chicken? Hadacha, ben chai, ben soli. Yeah. And that's pshat. The Gemara says, Hani milach chai. When did the Rabbi say it's good enough to do hadacha? When it was chai. How does the Rabbi and the Rashba learn chai? Chai means cold. Abul soli, but it's roasted and it's still hot, then you need cliff. Okay, along come the Rosh and the Smak. I say, no. That's not what I'm talking about. Chai and soli doesn't mean that. Chai means raw. It wasn't cooked. So Bosor chai means shaloi nitzla daim. It was raw. It was never cooked. What did soli mean? Bosor soli. It was once upon a time soli. And bein sein and bein reiseach. You're going to need kadei cliff. Why is that? If it's cold, why should we need kadei cliff? Didn't we say at the beginning of the simon that if two things touch each other, then it's good enough hadacha? So the Mefarshim explained that once something is cooked, it becomes softer. Once it becomes softer, it's more likely to absorb, and therefore hadacha is not going to be sufficient, and we're going to need kadei cliff. That's the way the Rosh and the Smak learns. What's it talking about then? So chai means uncooked. Soli means cooked, even if it's cold. And which case are we going to say osur kule when it says is pepili or matuv b'tavlin? Which case is that? It's going to be bosur soli, bein sein and bein reseach. So again, we don't care now. The Rosh and the Smak learn the words chai and soli literally. Pashat. Chai means raw, it was never cooked. And soli means it was cooked, even if now it's cold. It doesn't say anything about temperature. It says chai and soli. It doesn't say hot and cold. So therefore, when it says ve'is pili, kula aser, it's talking about the tzli, even if it's cold. So therefore, if you have a marinated piece of chicken, cold, sitting in the fridge, what would the first day say? What did the Rabbi and the Rashba say? Milk fell on your marinated raw. I'm sorry. You have spiced chicken, cold spiced chicken in the fridge. Milk spilled on it. What's the din?
Klippa.
Roasted chicken with barbecue sauce. And now it's cold, it's left over, it's in the fridge. According to the Rashba and the Ravid, what do?
Klippa.
According to the first day, yeah. It's cold now.
Hadacha.
Hadacha, according to the first opinion. And according to Rosh and the Smak,
Klippa.
what is it now? It's Bosor
Osur kule.
Solui and it's Matuvu Batavlin.
So osur kule.
Asur Kule. Minakotza lakotza. Look what happened over here. Haflufele. Okay? Hani milichai, according to the first day, means it's cold. So it's cold. It's gendik. No, it's a good enough kedei. It's good enough hadacha. Finished. Soli needs klippa. And if that's soli, which is hot, then you need klippa. So if it's pili and matuv b'tavim, then it's asur kule. But if it's a cold piece, who cares what's matuv b'tavim? We're not talking about that according to the Rav and the Rashba. Okay, but according to Rosh and the Smak, hani milachai, you do hadacha only if it was never cooked before. Once it's solid, then it's got soft and it's going to absorb more. You need kadei klippa. And then if this cold, even if it's cold, this solid, that it has holes or matuv b'tavlin, then the kulei asura. Big chumrah. Look how we made a jump over here. The same piece of chicken, according to the first day, is hadacha, and according to the second opinion, it says kulei asura. You have to chazer this over, but it's very reich. And you see, when you have the Gemara, it's worth learning these 3 lines of Gemara. Think about it. You're driving carpool or wherever you're doing. Just think over. It's not so long, this Gemara. And the easiest way to remember the day is by remembering the Gemara and figuring out it's just a little nuance and pshat over here, and you end up with the 2 days. You end up with a machaber ramah.
Is this the makar for what we talked about with the Truma Sadeshin? Like, because it's Bosor Tzoloi, so therefore even that little bit of salt, it's seeking to do a pa'ula on something that it's not accomplished anything, or no, it's not connected?
Yeah, you noticed over here that I've been talking about a case of dripping milk. I'm not talking about kutach. That's another discussion, which you bring up is a very interesting point. Do we differentiate when we say that this kutach has a little bit of salt in it, and therefore it's enough to do a dacha Rav Chinina paskind, and man chakim to figure this out? Okay, does that mean that if it's below the threshold of salt content, that it's as if it has no salt at all? It's another discussion. Excellent point, but it's going to take away. I'm treating them right now as if it had no salt, and that's a very big lav dafka. I'm just trying to. We don't have too much salted milk in most fridges, so I'm trying to make an example that people could find more relatable. This is something you could imagine happening, especially the old style grates in the fridges used to be porous. They used to be like grates rather than solid pieces. Okay,
So-
now we
so
have a
what's
third day. We have a third day. The Sefer HaTruma and the Tur go a step further. Let me take that off. Let's look at the Gemara. Look at this Gemara here. We got two lines here. Bahani milechaya votzli boy clip. That's one. Now we got a second line. So ve'ispe pili matuv v'tav. Second. Both of these two opinions, they differ in the definition of Chayin Soli. They both agree that what is this ispe pili? Starting from the word vispe pili, what is it talking about? It's talking about Soli. Right? That's both of them are learning that. That we have a case of Soli. So the first opinion says it's still hot. And therefore it says if it's still hot, that if it's ispe pili or matuv v'tav, then kuli asur. And according to the second opinion, it's talking about literally whether it's raw or roasted. So we're talking about chai means not roasted, and tzali means roasted even if it's cold. And therefore, since this ispe pili is referring to tzali, that basar tzali, even if it's cold, it's going to be kuli asur. The third opinion says, wait. Who says? Maybe it's a totally different statement. Maybe the ispe pili has nothing to do with tzali. It's talking about bechlal. There's a statement, when can you do a dacha if it's chai? If it's sali, it's not good enough chai, has to be clipped. Okay? And I'll tell you another din that applies to all meat, whether it's chai or whether it's sali. As pili kula asar, puzol tavlin kula asar. And that's the third opinion. Very, very big chumrah. According to Sefer Truma, so if it's regular basar chai, yeah. Okay, fine, good enough hadach. If it's salui, ben saying ben sayach, so then you need clipper. But if in tuba v'tavlin, afila basar chai kulu aser, which would mean, according to the Sefer Truma and the Tur, that if the milk falls on a raw piece of chicken, that's matuva v'tavlin, it's also kulu aser, or ispe pili, kulu aser. This opinion is not mentioned by the Machaber. It's brought up by the Shach. The fact is, the Pri Chodesh paskins like this third opinion. Okay, but the Shach brings it down, and that's why the Shach says we got such a big. You'll soon see that Ramah is more machmer than the Machaber, but he has a certain kula, and the Shach says, how can you have such a kula? Look, the Sefer Truma, the Torah, and there are other Rishonim too. They say even if it's basar chai, if it has holes in it, or it's matubal v'tav kula asura. So how can you afford to be so make? So that's why we have the psak over here. The Shulchan Aruch paskins like the first day. That chai means cold and sli means that it's still hot. The Ramah paskins like the second day. Chai means it was never cooked. And sali means it was cooked, whether it's raw, whether it's cold or whether it's hot. And then so to the kulei asura is talking about basar tzoli, whether it's cold or whether it's hot. But the third day, the Sefer Truma says it agrees with the first two cases, but then even basar chai is going to be kulei asur if it has holes in it or it's matubal b'tav. Okay, so that's the machlekes. So here we see it and we're going to have flying pieces of meat now, just to be mamchish this, I guess. So here we have a raw piece of meat. Chai is going to fall into chalav tzainin. See, this example is also treating it like the kutach habavli. Since it has such little salt, it's the same thing as regular cold milk. So what happens over here? Bosor chai falls into the milk. What's the din? No, Rabbi say, what's the din? Hadacha. Hadacha. Yeah. As long as it's cold, it needs hadacha. Fine. No disagreement about that, right? Everybody holds that. Good enough hadacha. Fine. Now, what if it's solui and it's hot?
Klifa.
Because they clip it. Yeah, it's a case of tatagava. Okay, this guy just fell in. He needs hadacha. And you have over here, this is a regular case of tatagava. So if it's still hot, we'll even make a klifa. But now we have a cold piece of chicken that was tzoli. Okay, so according to the first day, we learned that tzoli means hot. So according to the mechaber, what's going to be the din when this falls in? Since it's now cold, so what's going to be the din according to the mechaber? Hadacha. And according to the Ramah, tzoli means once upon a time it was broiled. By the way, the Ramah is going to say the same thing if it was cooked. Anyway, it doesn't matter how you cooked it. Baked, boiled, doesn't matter. Because what happens is that you softened. So what's going to be, according to the Ramah, which is the second opinion, if this cold piece of once upon a time cooked chicken falls into the milk, what's going to be the din? I know it looks like it looks like it's matubel v'tavlin. It's not. It's just burnt. Okay, it's not matubel v'tavlin. Let's assume this has no bakoyim. It's also debatable what's the bakoyim. We're going to get to that in a minute. But let's assume that the picture is too good. It's got too much detail. Let's imagine that there's no bakoyim and it's not matubel v'tavlin. Okay, but it was broiled. What's going to be the din according to Ramah? According to Machaber, it's going to be good enough hadacha. And what's going to be according to Ramah?
Klifa.
You could they klifa. If it's kolui and kar, so Shulchan Aruch says it needs hadacha. The Ramah says it needs klifa. Now the Ramah, however, puts in a kula. He said, "Behefsed meruba, we can rely on the mechaber." On the day is that the mechaber is quoting over there. Hefsed meruba, it's going to be good enough hadacha. Okay. However, the shach comes in and says it takes away this hefsed meruba. He says you need cliff anyway. How are you throwing in a kul like that? We have a daya that says you're going to answer the whole thing if it had any bekoyim in it and matubel v'tavlin. Geferlich machmer. So you're going to be so makel to say behefsed meruba. You're going to get away with hadacha. So the shach takes away this inyan of klifa. Okay, so this, yeah, 1 second. Okay, so you can go through some cases over here. Let's go further. So now this over here is matubel v'tavlin. See, it's even got bay leaves on top. This is somebody, a real chef, did this job over here. And you can see that this is Isbei Pili, Bakoyim, like it says Shulchan Aruch. It's got, this just looks like it was sliced, but it has holes over here. So now, this case over here, we got the matubel v'tavlin and the Isbei Pili. It falls into Cholav Seinen. So what's going to be the din? Ma din and Bosor matubel oyim Bakoyim. So what's going to be the din? So what if it's hot? Bosor b'kulei. Everybody agrees with that. Okay. What if it's cold? According to the first day, let's think it through. Let's think it through. According to the first day, Soli means what? According to the Machaber, the first day, Soli means hot. Yeah. So then when the Gemara came along and said, V'yispei pili, and it's talking about the tzoli, and the tzoli is only if it's hot. Yispei pili osur kule. And if it's going to be cold, according to Machaber, what's going to be the din? Adacha. Adacha. Because it's cold. It's going to be chai. So who cares? Chai, Yispei pili. But according to the Ramah, where the Ramah learns that tzoli means that it was cooked, and then the surface of the meat, or the whole meat, certainly the surface, became softer, then he's going to require kadei klifa. Then a matubel v'tavlin.
Asa bakula.
Okay, so here, these fell in over here. I like the way they disappear. So if it would be hot, everybody agrees Nesser Kula. That there's no Shaila. Shaila is what if it was cold? What's going to be the din? So that's a machlik. It's Machaber Ramah. According to the Shulchan Aruch, the first day, since it's cold, it doesn't go into the whole discussion of tzoli, and the line Yispei pili is talking about tzoli. So cold meat, it's not called tzoli, according to the first day. According to Ramah, tzoli means once upon a time was cooked. So therefore, that's what it means. Yispei pili, then it can be Nasser Kuli. Good? Far so good? Now, what about you have a raw? Okay, good. Now we have over here a raw piece of meat. This piece of meat is chai l'chol hadayis. Okay, it's chai, it's bosor chai. Okay. So then the Gemara said, is it talking about this case? What is the Machaber saying? This is a raw piece with bakoyim in it. I didn't explain that. You see, it's got ridges in it. It's got holes, slices, whatever you want to call it. It's Yispei pili, has bakoyim in it, but it's raw. According to the Machaber, what's the din?
Adacha.
Adacha. According to the Ramah, what's the din?
Klifa.
No. Let's think through the Gemara again. The Gemara said if it's chai,
Adacha.
Adacha.
Chinera said that you need a good enough adacha. But then the Gemara said, when does that apply? If it's chai, it's good enough adacha. If it's soli, then you need klifa. Yeah. And then the Gemara came along and said, this soli, the way the Machaber Ramah learned, that this soli, if it's the Yispei pili, then you need also bakula. So what's it going to need? According to Ramah, according to Machaber, it's good enough adacha. According to Ramah,
Also adacha.
Also adacha.
weiter adacha. And according to the Sefer Truma,
Also kulei.
Asur Kule, because the Yispei pili is going back on the chai, it goes on all types of meat.
Does it make a difference if which,
So
which
here,
direction
Bosor
it's going?
chai, bakar, adacha, both Machaber and Mahol like that. He doesn't bring down over here that third day, because even the Shach doesn't paskin like that. The Shach says that since there's such a chomer dik opinion, how can the Ramah be makel behefsid to be matter and let you get away with hadacha? Okay, but the Shach is not machmer like that. The Pri Chadash, so he takes away the head of the Ramah. The Pri Chadash paskins like that day to Asur Kulei, but it's not mentioned on the page of Shulchan Aruch. But we'll soon see the Alter Rebbe does mention it. Let me give weiter. First, let's learn Shulchan Aruch. Okay, so we have all the background we need to understand Shulchan Aruch. Oh, the mefalgin on this that we differentiate. Bein nachem machmas milchei, lein nachem machmas milchei. This much salt is going to be malei karaseich, and if it has less salt, it's not. When does that matter? Hani mili b'bosor chai. Yeah. So that's why Chinanel said you could get away with hadacha, because there was not so much salt in the kutoch. That's only talking about bosor chai. Avol tzli, Reiseach, says the Mechaber. That's the key word over here. The Mechaber adds the word Reiseach to the Gemara. Because that's what the Rav and the Rashba touch up the Gemara. So it's not enough that it was once upon a time. It's still Tzli Reiseach. And that fell into the Maliach. So I feel a Nechem Machmas Malche. Boy clipper. It needs clipping. Yeah, that's the way you learn the Gemara. Vim yesh be'bekoyim, and if it has ispepili, it's got holes. Oshom matov v'tavlin. Futzli, what's the next word? Reiseach. Kule, and it's still hot. So again, that ispepili is coming to modify the tzli, which according to the Mechaber is talking about it's hot. Then the hutzli reiseach kulios. I don't know what the comments over there. Yeah, and it was totally, and if it's hot, then it's kuliyas. Then the Ramah says, "For then off him a bushel doesn't matter. Dafka sli, it has nothing to do with sli. Some cases we differentiate. We had at the beginning of Pei Zayin, sli is a derech bishul, not derech bishul against machlekes. But over here, it doesn't matter. As far as we're concerned, over here, it's talking about softening the flesh, so therefore it doesn't matter. Now the Ramah comes in, v'yesh eimbrim dafilu heim tzeinin nim dinach. That even if they are now cold, has the same din. So that it says soli means that it was soli, it was cooked. And it doesn't matter whether it cooled off later or not, anyway. So therefore, once it was cooked, if it falls in stamazai, then it needs klippa. And it was yesh b'bakoy metuvo tavlin, then it's also cool. And then the Ramah says, "V'kein yesh lina gim'ein hefsed meruba." So you should be machmer like the second opinion, unless it's hefsed meruba. If it's hefsed meruba, you can rely on the Mechaber. You can rely on the Mechaber and tight up that sli means that right now it's hot. And on that, along comes the Shach and says, "My eye, how can it be maker like that? How can we make it like that? We have an opinion, b'chal is asa kulei, even raw meat, according to that third opinion. So how can we make? So the Shach takes away this hefsed meruba heter of the Ramah. What just happened? Okay, this is okay. In the slideshow, this is a review, but I'm going to skip the review for now. We'll come back to it in Mitzvah Hashem and look here at the Alter Rebbe. This is Alter Rebbe Hilchos Pesach. Sim Tov Samachei Sifhei. I want to point out something here, just one other thing in this Ramah. The Ramah said, "V'yesh eimer the filahim seinim din hachi." If you had nothing else other than the Ramah, you could think seinim means cold raw meat too. But it's obvious from the Makedas and the discussion, and certainly the way the Shach learns the Ramah, and certainly the way it looks from the Ramah himself, he's not talking about that third day, he's talking about the second day. Okay, he's talking about sli that was saying, and not talking about raw that's saying. I just want to make that clear, because just looking at the Ramah itself, you wouldn't necessarily know that. So along comes Hilchos Pesach. Now, we can't learn everything from Hilchos Pesach. You know, even when we're learning the din of Malicha, Dam has one din, Bosor b'chalav has another din, and other Yisurim has other dinim. So we can't compare everything along the board. You have to know the reasons behind things to know what to compare and what not to compare. So too, when it comes to Hilchos Pesach, we have certain chumras, chametz aser b'mashro, you can't necessarily extrapolate. But as the Eberstadt helped, and over here he speaks explicitly about Bosor b'chalav, and the Alter Rebbe talks about asimin. What's the din? Im shiv shafu morsan ba'avas lach mimayim. Okay, so they were rubbing wheat bran, on a goose, on a wet goose. The goose is wet from water. Why are they rubbing bran on wet geese? I have no idea. But that's what they did. Alter Rebbe says im, but the Alter Rebbe doesn't take every case. It must be something they used to do. Afal pishu tzeinim, even though it's a cold goose, bein ba'eda ba'ere bein shehuvshat meire, whether you took the skin off or it still has the skin. You rub bran on this goose, can't eat the goose for Pesach. Why? Because this bran gets into the holes in the skin. You pulled out the feathers, the little holes there. So you're gonna get some mashes over there. Chametz also mashu. V'gam b'basar yesh b'koyim b'chol tzad. And so too, the meat also has b'koyim all over the place. V'derech hanakavim v'b'koyim nivla tam amursim b'abas. And through these holes and these different folds, some of the taste of the amursim gets absorbed. Also mashahu, end the story. V'afal pisha b'shari surim. And even though b'shari surim, it's not the din like that. Again, for example, and he quotes our din, Bosor tzeinain, that you have cold meat. Shenofel l'tei cholav tzeinain, it fell into cold milk. And afal pishayesh b'bosor b'koyim harbem, that even though there are many holes in the meat, negin lahater abosor, al yedei shtifa vadacham, you're going to be allowed to use this meat. If you rinse it well, behev said meru by shasat chakamish goes to be a day of Simon Tzaddik Aleph. What kind of Shulchan Aruch was Alter Rebbe reading over here? This is a different Shulchan Aruch than we have. What does it say in our Shulchan Aruch? It says that if cold meat falls into milk, what's the din? It's good enough adacha. Only behev said meru by shasat chak. It says that in Shulchan Aruch. Anybody saw that anywhere?
It said here b'koyim, but there's a lot of splits.
Good. In the Shulchan Aruch, what's it talking about, the case of the split? The b'koyim, the ispe pila, what's it talking about? It's talking about raw meat or cooked meat? According to both of Machaber and Ramah, it's talking about cooked. It's talking about soli. That was a line in the Gemara. Ispe pili is coming to modify the din of tzoli. According to the Mechaber, it's only hot tzoli. According to the Ramah, it's even cold tzoli. But it's tzoli. It's not talking about raw. Who says it's a problem if it's raw? That the hadach is not going to be enough. That's a sefer atruma. So the pretty chadash mamish paskins like that. And he answers it. Kuli asura if it has b'koyim, even if it's raw meat. If it has b'koyim. The Alter Rebbe toned it down one, and he allows to have said meruba. Look over here, the Maramok and Chavav on the bottom, the new Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. Simon Zev Shulchan Aruch Rabbeinu Legil Yadenu. We don't have Simon Tzaddik Aleph. Berei Ramasham Shamater B'Tzeinin Rak Behefser Meruba. Okay, so the Ramah is going to allow Tzeinin, but also solely the way the certainly the way the Shach learns. Now I don't know. Maybe he's being maramis this over here. I mentioned that you just learned the Ramah without knowing all the background. You could learn that the Ramah, that Tzeinin also you should be matir, and maybe that's what Alter Rebbe means. I don't know. It seems that it's a stretch. The Shach. Sivkot Nachafei, Haina Davka Batzoli, and Mavushel Shunstad. Yeah. The Prichodesh, a Cheshish Ladas Aishim Afilu B'Chaytzain. As the Prichodesh paskins like that third set of Rishonim. By the way, if you look at the Seder al Shach, the Shach brings that third opinion. He brings it first. The Seder is reversed the way the Shach quotes it of this in Chafei. And the Minchas Pittim in Neisofis. You look over there. So he brings down this whole thing, and where's the Alter Rebbe getting from? He discusses it. He points this out. That what do you mean? It doesn't say that in Simon Tzaddik Aleph. Commercial cause of Yeredei Simon Tzaddik Aleph. My high. Okay, and the Piskei Admar Zokin, he has a whole discussion about this, and applying it toward the. It's also interesting. We just look at the Lashon Alter Rebbe. It almost looks, and it seems to be massing to a certain extent, Begashmis. Where do you see a piece of meat that has no the lace pepili? Where do you have a totally smooth piece of meat? When you have a schnitzel, for example, you have chicken breasts, raw chicken breasts. So you have the top of the raw chicken breast is smooth. That I understand. But the other side of the chicken breast already is pepili. Have bakoyim. Yeah. That's a lush in the Alter Rebbe. You look at the second paragraph. The Alter Rebbe Shari Surim Kam Bosor Tzein Shnopel Tfaltan Aval Pishesh B'Bosor B'Koyim Harbe. It's The Shai is Alter Rebbe giving you a conditional. Alter Rebbe saying the fact that even though meat has a lot of bakoyim in it, that's the nature of meat. It has bakoyim. Who has smooth meat? Aside from that top part of a chicken breast, how smooth is the chicken already? Pulka maybe has also. You have that shiny membrane and makes it smooth. So it could be that's an exception to the rule. Akaponim, we see over here. He brings over there in Piskei Admar Azaken whether there's maybe a Magen Avram that also leads the Alter Rebbe in this direction. But that's it. This is the crucial issue over here. And here, I just put this together once upon a time. So in the order of the Shach, he brings down first the opinion Sefer Trumas. I put down this other Rishonim over here. But you see what happens over here? Both Machaber and Ramah. Machaber is number 2, when the Ramah is number 3. This line, Hani Milech Chai Avotzoli by Clip, and this line Ispe Pili Kula Aser Matubotavim Kula Aser. Both Machaber and Ramah learn that line is talking about Tzoli. The Chiddush of the Sefer Trumas is that it goes even if it's Bosor Chai. That's what it looks like the Alter Rebbe is being Cheshish for. Okay, Rabbi Isai. So that's it for this week. And next week in Metz Hashem, so we start getting into like real practical cases. Tzadik Beis, a big, very sadistic gedinim, Techanas and Nevela, and Tipus Chola, all of these things over there, and we start getting mixed together in the Kalim. I'm going to stop the recording here.